Yep, that's there.
Is the gauge supposed to say empty?
You can't trust those things. Don't worry, we're tethered for safety.
Asking the right question can greatly impact your future.
Are you certified for this?
Technically, no.
Especially when it comes to your finances.
Do you have a question?
Are you a certified financial planner?
Yes, I'm a CFP professional.
CFP professionals are committed to acting in your best interest. That's why it's gotta be a CFP. Find your CFP professional at letsmakeaplan.org.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
I think it is definitely, women are raised so much differently than men. And having, 4 girls and 2 boys, I can honestly say my girls get away with nothing. Like if they go fold your clothes, do your laundry, put your stuff away. My boys, it's more of it's okay. I'll do it for you. I don't know why. I think there's some sense that's been passed down and continues to be passed down from generation to generation where women know nobody's going to do it for them. And we train our daughters, get it done. Don't complain about it. Nobody's going to come save you. And I think that's a great message. I think had I not had, and that's my mother to a T, overly so. Had I not had my mother, I might not have made it through everything that I've been through and been able to bounce and roll and be independent.
That's Julie Barth, a mother, a trauma survivor, and the founder of a nonprofit dedicated to supporting women-led households in times of crisis. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Julie Barth is a mom, a writer, a trauma survivor, and the founder of a nonprofit focused on helping other women, particularly those who are leading their households in times of crisis. Julie's 2024 memoir, Notes from a Blackberry, chronicles her journey through many challenges and is a testament to something a wise psychiatrist who worked with military and veterans once said to me. The question is not why so many people have PTSD. The question is how the human mind is so resilient and so many people don't. The difficult journey that Julie includes in her book includes her daughter, Tatum, beginning to suffer from a seemingly undiagnosable set of symptoms that turned out to be a rare genetic condition, and the diagnosis of her husband, Colin, with terminal cancer. Julie went, in many ways, from a life she had imagined to navigating complexities of trying to save 2 fragile lives while being a mother to her 3 other children at the time. After Colin died, Julie entered into what would turn out to be an abusive relationship that compounded her trauma. One of the often unexplored aspects of trauma is how trauma begets more trauma. It has a compounding effect, leaving us vulnerable to people and things that we otherwise would have avoided, opening doors to even more suffering. But the other side of trauma is that it can be the soil that resilience grows in the same way that fire tempers steel or winter prepares the spring. Listening to what Julie has been through and how she came through it all left me thinking about these important questions and many more. Today, Julie joins me to discuss those questions and to talk about her struggles, how she made it through, and what she learned and what lessons she hopes others can take from her experience. Hey, Julie. So I wanted to thank you for coming on and just give you some insight on what, when I first heard about you, read your biography, and then heard about your book, I think my first gut reaction was like, how could so many difficult things befall one person? And then as I read more, I really thought about the idea that, you know, your story is a real testament to resilience and how resilient we are, even when we don't realize how resilient we are. And I thought sort of that marrying of those two ideas, that trauma is this thing that causes us to suffer immensely and it can change our lives and our choices. But it is also something, I think about my life and I think about the best things about myself. They were forged in fire. And I thought your story really captured both of those things in a really powerful way. And then I was excited to hear, that you're actually taking this and turning it into something that, not only enriches your life and the life of your family, but, you're making your best effort to help other people who have walked in similar spaces. And I think there are a lot, and I think we don't talk about it enough, move forward. And that's just sort of a beautiful gift to give out of your suffering, if that makes sense.
It does. And thank you for saying so. When you said that, a couple things stood out. First is, it's funny because I will start telling my story and it's, it's almost like, oh, and then, and then, and I shock myself, with the level of, the things that go on. But I do agree that if I didn't have all of those things in my path, I think about how I started. I think we all do. And the person that I was to begin with has altered and changed so many times that it almost forced me to leave the parts of me that didn't work behind. So everyone's a work in progress, but I will say that, resilience, you don't even know that you're being resilient until you bounce on the other side of it and you think, gosh, everyone says, how'd you do it? And you yourself are like,
It's
don't
a
know.
really good question.
Somehow I just did. Yeah. I'm here. That's how I did it.
That is an interesting point because I think, when I think of moments where people will say to me afterwards, wow, you're really resilient, or I'll think of moments that in retrospect I look at and I'm like, wow, that was a moment of resilience. In the moment, it did not feel that way. It actually often feels like the world is collapsing. And, you could call it hindsight bias, but I do think the reality is when you are in those moments where you need your resilience at the greatest level, where it is going to help you the most, it's really the bounce back from the tough thing. And so it's really hard to see the forest through the trees in that moment and realize how strong you are. And I see that more clearly when I'm looking at other people who are going through difficult times. And I'm looking at, them struggling through something and they feel they are collapsing. And sometimes I'm looking at them, I'm like, you have no idea how amazing you are at this particular moment. And I love that idea that you brought up about leaving your best part, the parts that didn't work behind. I think that's a real powerful idea because, I I look at some of the most difficult things that have happened to me in my life and the biggest mistakes that I've made. They really did shape me and they really did change me. And I wish that there was another way, right? That I could have lost those parts of me. And I think you just articulated it in a great way. But I'm not sure I really would have liked the person that I would have become if I hadn't gone through that. And I like this person better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's funny because I've been asked about it before. And, I've told people, and I think probably to their great shock, that the moments of greatest suffering in my life are also the moments where I receive my greatest gifts. So in a very strange way, I love the things that I hate happened because without them, there's no me.
I would agree. I think, I see I have two middle schoolers, God bless them. And, they're constantly coming home and saying, oh, so-and-so is going to Europe or so-and-so is doing da-da-da. And I'm on the other end of it thinking, yeah, like, so. Um, it does come, if I were their age, if I hadn't gone through what I've gone through, maybe those things would be things that I would value. I find that the things that when I was young seemed like I had, tried so hard to attain, the car, the nice home, with every challenge that I've gone through, I looked at it and I thought, I could have had all the money in the world. I mean, I could have been a billionaire, to be quite honest. It would have been easier, sure, but it wouldn't have changed losing my husband. It wouldn't have changed the fact that my daughter has a rare genetic condition. And when you start to understand that there are other forces out there besides what we all think we want, and you start really seeing, okay, I don't have the car, that I want, but I don't spend time trying to get it anymore. I would rather take that money and say, like, I'm gonna, take the kids on a beach trip and spend my time with them, and knowing that you can't take anything with you, right? The only thing that you leave this earth with are your memories. And when you start valuing things that are outside of monetary or tangent, and you start recognizing that you really only have one life to live, I think that really does come from seeing the ugly side of life, to see what's really great and beautiful.
Yeah. Perspective shifting. It really puts things in perspective. You mentioned two of the things. You mentioned your daughter's genetic condition and then also losing your husband. And I'm sorry for that loss. I know it's been some time, but I feel like those kinds of the grief never ends, right? Yeah. And, I think of the idea of, it's hard to fathom the idea of losing your spouse, and I know it happens to people. But I think, it's so obvious in reading your writing about your husband, how deep that love was. And, I've always felt that grief is really the song we sing for the people that we love after they're gone. And it's very obvious from the way that you wrote about him, that there was a lot of love there. And but before I dive into those things, I'm just sort of curious. Before all of this happened, before your husband died, before your daughter was diagnosed, going back to what you were just saying a second ago, what did you imagine your life would be like, and what were you during that time? I guess it's the before time for you. What were you really thinking about and pursuing when you were younger?
Well, I'm a Generation Xer, and I think it's hard for other generations to understand the X mentality. I think we were the first generation of women who, we were taught by the older generation, like, look, we secured all of these opportunities for you. And we were supposed to be highly grateful, which, don't get me wrong, obviously I was grateful. But there was this undertone of, you just want to be a mom. Like, and I will say, from the minute that I can remember, all my friends and people in my world were, oh, I want to be, a veterinarian. I want to be, and everybody had these grand, I want to be the head of the board, and I really just wanted to be a mom. I lived a very sheltered life, and in that I mean, my mother was an introvert. She still is. One of my best jokes is people would say to me, "How's your mom dealing with social distancing?" And I said, "My mom invented it. She's just happy.
She's in heaven right now." Right?
She's glad we're all taking her lead.
I have a bit of an introverted streak myself, and so I remember that conversation where one of my colleagues was like, how are you dealing with all of this? I was like, this is my heaven. And she was like, oh, now I really believe it. You are an introvert. And I'm like, yes.
You're right. When those things didn't bother you. Um, but so, it's just my sister and I, and we didn't get along very well. We were 2 years apart. I mean, we're fine now, but we lived in the middle of nowhere. And I think that I was lonely growing up. My parents didn't get along. We didn't do family stuff. And so all I wanted, and, I say this, I think in the book a couple times, like throughout my entire life, all I've wanted to be is normal. And when you think about that word, for me, normal meant everybody did their thing. Nobody looked outlandish. You fell within these parameters. There was no drama, and that's all I've ever really wanted was a normal life. But somehow it's like, I do believe in the universe and molding you. And it was like at every stage of my life, all I wanted was to be a mom, have a normal life that was unencumbered and peaceful. And, I did want a lot of children, which I did end up obviously being able to have. But, it was almost like with every hurdle, exactly what I wanted growing up it was elusive. It was like I kept trying to grab at straws that weren't there because I wanted something that I couldn't define for myself, but it definitely didn't look like what I was dealing with. Um, so, that's always been my thing. I just wanted to blend in, have, very quiet, the white picket fence, job that I went to that I enjoyed or didn't go to, just like a part-time job and the traditional roles of having a husband who's supportive and goes to work and takes care of you. That was my vision of the perfect life.
Mm. Mm. And it's almost as if you sort of found eventually a version of that or what felt like a version of that.
At certain points, but it was almost like every time I did find it and I went, oh, this is it. Something would come crashing in and remind me that it wasn't perfect.
Mm.
Or it was perfect, I suppose, because every new thing that came in, it's funny how you could be having a bad day, like, just an ordinary bad day, and something happens in that day, and you are forever changed. And everything that you knew, everything is turned upside down, and you wish that you could go back to your bad day. And I think that has been the resounding theme that I've lived is, every time I think something is not great, I think, oh no, it's pretty good. I'm gonna stay right here. uh, Definitely could always be much, much worse. So I'm going to appreciate the minute I'm in.
I do have that thought at times when I'm going through very difficult things and I look back and I'm like, 6 months ago, I was worried about this. I'd take that back right now for all the money in the world.
Absolutely. Where I wouldn't be to be upset like I was 2 days ago.
Right. Yes. I think a real turning point in your story certainly was in kind of a point that I think changed things in a dramatic way was when your daughter started to get sick. And I was curious about what initially happened, because in the beginning it was unclear what was going on, right?
Well, we had my son, and then we had two miscarriages. And, again, I wanted this big family. I was hell-bent, and that's been prevalent too. I was going to have it come hell or high water. But when I got pregnant with Tatum, our second child, she just stopped growing, like in utero. Just, I go in and they were like, congratulations, you're 6 weeks. In 10 weeks, congratulations, you're 6 weeks, all the way up to like 12 weeks, when instrument error, even though it was in the year 2000, instrument error couldn't explain what was going on. All we knew was that she wasn't growing. And it went from one thing. First, it was, oh, she's got trisomy 18. And then we'd have an amnio. And they were like, oh, nope, her chromosomes are fine. But she has a syndrome and she's going to come out and not be able to swallow. Yeah. And so it was like one thing after another. And, I think that it was literally 9 months of roller coaster where we didn't know what
Hmm.
we were dealing with. So, and then she came out, and it was another 5 years of still trying to figure out what on earth does she have. Back in the day, there was no Google, probably a good thing for me because I'm a worrier. But the other thing is, rare genetic conditions was you would go. We went to the Mayo Clinic. We went to Children's Memorial in Chicago. The only way that they would diagnose you is either through a genetic marker of some sort, which there was none for Tatum, or literally they got out their little encyclopedia books and flipped through the pages. Oh, she's got a, twisted, pinky. Well, her head's small, whatever it was. And, that is the way that they would diagnose things. And if you fell outside of those parameters, which Tatum did, she was 2 inches too tall, or, then it was an endless, what's wrong with Tatum? And we went through that for years as we were traveling from hospital to hospital trying to fix really what was medical malpractice when she came out was what we were really in the crux of trying to deal with, not globally what was wrong with her. We didn't find out that she has something called primordial dwarfism until she was 5 and had gone through 40 different surgeries just to repair her throat.
Mm. And so, it, so not, you go through that period during any pregnancy is going to be stressful enough, but you've had your first child, 2 miscarriages, and then somewhere along the way in the pregnancy itself, there's all this stress and this worry. And then you have her, and it's still a mystery about what to do for a child. And I just think about how difficult and stressful and hard it is to be a parent of a newborn anyway, in the best possible scenario. But to have a young child and then a sick and fragile child, I think, going through that for such a long period, it must have been exhausting.
It was, because it was almost like, we sat for, we knew from day one, I knew something was up, but, we went through 9 months of, well, when she comes out, we'll figure it out. And so there was almost this like, oh, she's here, thank God. And then, oh my gosh, we still don't know what's wrong.
Right.
It set us on an entire, 5 more years. So, but, the exhaustion was really overtaken by these fire drill. Tatum is either the most unlucky human being on the entire planet, or the most lucky of the whatever it is.
The luckiest of the unlucky.
I can't figure it. She's always, if there is like a 1 in a million, she's on the side of it. Sometimes that's positive for her, but sometimes it's not. And, I would take her in for a cold, and the next thing I know, she's flatlining. And, just like whatever could go wrong did go wrong. But at the same time, she's still here. So, I say even to this day, if, I'll go to through the drive-through and, okay, what do you want? Everybody's orders. I'll have 6 orders. I'll put it in. I'll come home, open up that bag. And sure enough, Tatum's order is always missing. Always. And it's not even like that she orders something unusual. Like she just orders a cheeseburger. And I'm like, it's almost a cosmic joke at some point without the joke of it. Now we find the fun in it, but just the amount, and that's really where the book came from, is the amount of times I heard a doctor say, we weren't expecting this, or, oh my gosh, I've never seen this happen, or gosh, I've never done that before. It's truly unreal.
Mm-hmm. What did you during that time when you were dealing with it in that 5-year period, you get to the diagnosis, and that's not the end of the story, right? That's just an answer. But did you feel some sense of relief once you got the diagnosis?
Well, as I said, most of the things that we were dealing with were malpractice related. They damaged her throat severely, which, it was life-saving, I guess, but they lied about it for many years. So, by the time we found out what was really wrong with her, I will say, and this is true to probably me, and says a lot about my personality and Colin's, who was my first husband. He came home from work and we're 5 years in of going, here and there in every hospital. And she's on the mend and doing much better. And I had random people come up to me at the store and say, is your daughter the one on on the Discovery Channel show? And mind you, I had absolutely no idea what they were talking about, like zero. I hadn't seen the show. I had no idea what they were talking about. And then one of my best friends called and said that she knew what she had. And it was this thing called primordial dwarfism. And I Googled it because Google was just finally coming around, and Colin came home from work and I'm devastated. I'm just literally in tears. And I said, you need to prepare yourself, sit down, you've got to read this because everything, when I Googled it, up popped her face, her history, everything was like a light bulb of, oh my gosh, like, and he looked at it and then he looked back at me and he said, what's for dinner? And I was like, I mean, stunned, like, what do here I'm like, everything, she has this thing. And he looked at me and said, Julie, did you really think that there was nothing wrong, that everything was totally normal with her? And to my credit, I said, yeah, I really did.
So he had calmly made his peace a long time ago.
Oh, he was like, and I think, as stunned as I was that he didn't believe that she was okay, I think he was like, you can't even be serious in all this, Julie. Like,
what planet are you?
Yeah, she was 8 pounds. She was running around 0 to 3 month, running shoes. Like, didn't really think something was going on. And I thought, well, no, but, I think that's how I got through it too, is, when you're in the NICU, when you go through these things, if there wasn't a diagnosis, I could carry on with my little charade that one day she was just going to grow out of it and, things would be, you wouldn't even, that's what people say to you in the NICU, someday you're not even going to notice all this went on. So I was waiting for that day. It just never materialized.
Well, and I also think that some of that is probably compartmentalization, which is like self-protecting, right? That, it may have been what you needed to make the next step, if that makes us, to make it through the next day.
Yeah, and I will say that that's what I'm saying about my personality. When people do ask me, like, how do you do it? I live very well in a state of, it's not denial. I really can say it's not denial.
I think denial is underrated.
It is, as long as you can acknowledge stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But I had the same therapist for many, many years. And at the end, one day I sat down with her and I said to her, you do realize that I don't listen to anything you say. She said, yes, Julie, I do.
She's like,
that. Because I'm that person to listen and be like, okay, you say what you say, and I'm going to believe what I want to believe.
Right.
But thank you.
But I think there's some real truth to it because, people, I think we use denial in a pejorative, but where it really comes, or the phrase disassociation, they tend to be both very pejorative, but in reality, where they come from is our ability to compartmentalize, right? I'm driving down the street, there's a terrible accident in front of me. I see that accident, I see what the firefighters and other people are doing. For that moment, it captures me, it's horrendous, but I've got to go on with my day and safely drive on the road, right? So I need to put that in a compartment. And I think where compartmentalization only really becomes unhealthy is when it results in me banging my head against the same wall over and over again. And anyone who knows me will tell you that I'm very good at banging my head against the same wall, like just different color over and over again. I'm like, it really was because it was a blue wall. It was a blue wall. And they're like, no, it's not because it was blue.
You're right. It's more like all blue.
Well, these are bricks this time. But I do think that there is, there is a self-protective thing in that, right? Because that piece of you, if you think about it, you have a bad relationship, or you have a child who goes through something difficult, or you have a boss who's horrible, or something goes wrong in the job, that if you cannot sort of suspend that experience temporarily, you'll never get back up and do it again. And I think it's really the balance. How do I compartmentalize that enough that it doesn't keep me from moving forward? But I do remember some of the lessons from it. And I think one of the things I've noticed about people who are really resilient is that they tend to lean toward the having a greater ability to compartmentalize, if that makes sense.
I would agree with you. And, it just struck me when you said that people do look at, I had so many people in my life, at many points in my life, almost seeing my denial as a weakness. Like I wasn't living in the real world. In their thought process, it was a detriment that I was living in this world where Tatum was normal, although everyone else didn't think so. But I don't, for the person who uses that tool, it is one of the most effective tools that the human body has. As you said, we would be lost without the ability. So denial does get a bad name.
Well, because the reality is the world is filled with suffering, and it's filled with very difficult things, and it's filled with setbacks. And if you have to live in all of those all the time, and I even mean people who are not necessarily as good as you or I at compartmentalizing, you would never get up. There'd be no reason to get up.
I really do think that's a lot of what's going on right now, is that, people are so caught up in things and acknowledging things. If we have to acknowledge everything all the time now, everything has a label. You have to acknowledge, I have a 24-year-old that's living with us right now. And every time she says something, she has to start this phrase of, and I'm not trying to incite, or I don't know what the exact phrase is, or something about and I'm not trying to offend. The fact that you have to put that out there because everybody is taking everything at once all the time, and not being able to put things aside for a minute has made us, I think, all very anxiety ridden, because we're always thinking about potentials. And, so when you can take something and only focus on what it is that's in front of you, you do a lot better job dealing with it.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not suggesting that we should all live in denial. That is not my, what I always say.
No, your point, I think you're making a much more nuanced point than that.
Well, I always say that those things that serve us the best, I can live in my own little world like none other. The things that serve us the best, when we don't recognize that they're no longer working for us, is when we get into trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, when you just keep on keeping on with whatever worked in one situation without recognizing it's not working for you anymore, that's when it becomes a detriment.
Right. And I'm curious for you, you guys are going through that and you get to the point of diagnosis. And, as of late, I've been dealing with a lot of people who are struggling with cancer. And one of the things that I've realized when it comes to certain types of things, certain types of illnesses, but it also can, you think of the death of a parent or other big events that happen in your life, they can really be identity shifting. And you were in a situation where you had a fragile child that you had to be a caregiver for. And then your husband's diagnosed with terminal cancer at the same time. I mean,
yeah.
What was that like?
It all seemed to flow so much together that I have a hard time separating the two of the events. It was almost like I hate to. This is again another part of my personality is that I'm very good at seeing the positive in something, even if it's not there. I guess sometimes, but when Colin Tatum was sick for many years, but I never saw her as a sick child. Even after I found out what she had, I still was like, I'm not living in the special needs world. Like, I'm not going to all the appointments. I'm not going to, Tatum had a trach and I would take her to pools and people would just be like, so upset with me because, she could get sick. Don't take her to the mall. She could get sick. And so I fought against the caregiving side of that for so long that, I used to say to people, what good is a life to preserve if we won't let them live it? And that was always my thing with Tatum. I didn't, she honestly is probably still on loan. That's how I feel with her. Like, I feel like she's on loan to me. I don't know how long she's going to be here, but I'm going to make the best of it. And so I think even with her diagnosis, I was living in a world where she was going to be fine and normal and great and whatever. When Colin's diagnosis came along, it was kind of the same thing, but his mother was the oldest living ovarian cancer patient in the United States at that point. She had lived, diagnosed at 40, lived an extra 30 years. So, there was that part of me that thought that he was going to make it too. And ironically, when he got sick, it was like, I really did get a break from the universe because all of Tatum's issues almost seemed to take such a back seat that I didn't have to focus on her. And she flourished, which is odd. When he was sick, that she flourished. It was almost like all of the energy was taken off of her and the focus, and she could just exhale. And all of that moved to caring for Colin. So although it was happening at the same time, it's very odd to me because I forget that there was crossover because there had to be. She was still, medically fragile. She was still, but for some reason, she no longer was special needs in my head. I was able to say, okay, I'm going to treat her like I'm treating everybody else indefinitely because I have to focus over here. And it was probably the best thing that ever happened for her. As a caregiver, I guess I was so young that I didn't really have time to think about the role as caregiver. I don't even know that I even spoke in terms of caregiving until after he passed and probably years after, like recognizing what was really going on in our home.
How old were you
Yeah.
when he was diagnosed?
I was 34 when he was diagnosed. The day we found out, they told him he had 2 weeks to live. We had, by that point, my oldest was 10, and my youngest was literally 6 months when we were at the hospital, and we had two, Tatum in the middle and then another child. And they said he had 2 weeks to live, go take him home, let him say goodbye to his kids. And again, I was like, yeah, no, that is not going to work for me. And he ended up living 18 months, but we were doing so well at a certain point that really we thought he was going to be able to go for surgery. We were like rock stars in the chemo world, which is like what I call it. And you're right, it is an alternate universe. Nothing's ever the same. You get a chair when you walk in. They scoot you, they sit you down, you get your IV, and then they're like, see ya. And Colin was doing so well and proving that this experimental drug trial that he was in, he was proving it so well that we got our own, like we walked in and they gave us a room. We were royalty until we weren't. When it started to spread, we were promptly shown the door and that was the end of it.
I'm just trying to imagine what that moment was like when you realized that he wasn't going to be able to recover.
I think there was one conversation we had, and it was a turning point for me. And it was when I was drug kicking and screaming, past optimism and living in a world where he wasn't going anywhere. We were eating at lunch and He had become very quiet for obvious reasons. And he looked at me and he said, you know, um, Julie, people die from cancer. I get that. Like, I know people die from cancer, but, what is it that people actually die of? And I just sat there. And it was such an odd question for me, but at the same time, like yeah, like, because you don't talk about it. Nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to talk about what actually kills you. Cancer? Does cancer kill you? No. Dehydration, infection, you know, is it a, contributing factor? Yes. But when he finally voiced his, like, we need to discuss this. Yes, it's taboo. Yes, we're trying to all talk about something other than what we're facing. But when he forced me to say, yeah, you need to discuss this, we can
We're
no
living
longer
in a
pretend.
world where this
Yeah.
needs to be a normal part of our conversation.
Right. And you can't continue to hide it and worry about it on your own. He finally let me into his thoughts. And from that moment, I did have to come to terms with, yeah, like this is the end. But we're gonna go out fighting. But yeah, and I think the worst day, that was a day when I thought, yeah, I still had hopes. He wasn't that far gone at that point. But I think that day and then the other day was, the day when he asked me, he still wanted to go on with chemo. And, he's 70 pounds and missing time with his kids. And there was no hope. He wanted to continue to do chemo. And I let him one time. And it sounds bad saying I let him, but I supported it, I suppose. And his brain was so incapacitated at that point that I really did let him. And that's a sad statement. But the day when I started lying to him and saying, yep, we're going to go for chemo. Yep. And
Mm,
knowing full well we never were.
where it's almost like your spouse becomes like your child in a way.
It does. And, I talk about it a lot because I didn't know about survivor's guilt. I thought it was like two people on a life raft, one makes it, one doesn't. But the amount of survivor's guilt that I had coming out of that situation, and so much of it revolved around lying to him. And,
Mm,
he didn't know. He barely knew his name half the time. But I would have to lie to him every day, look him in the eye, and then I stopped lying to him and I would say point blank to him, Colin, you're gonna die. And it was so hurtful for me to say it, but he didn't, he was like, oh, okay, that's right. And I was the one that would walk away having to say it. Oh, and it killed a little part of me every time I had to say it. But, things get to a point where you have to do and
yeah.
clean up the mess later.
You mentioned the thing about survivor's guilt. Was that for you a measure of why him? Why am I
No,
staying and why him? Or,
I hate to say it, but survivor's guilt to me was more, why didn't you save him? Why didn't
mm,
you do more for him? Why didn't you spend more time with him? Why didn't you research more? Because there was a point where we could have gone to MD Anderson instead of Chicago. Well, I didn't, I might have stayed there in Chicago and took that trial instead of MD Anderson because I didn't want to move the family. And those are the things that you have to do and they're rational. But when they don't make it, you go, well, maybe if I wasn't so selfish and worrying about, relocating and we had just gone, like maybe he'd still be here. And you think about all of the things that you did in the moment. You made the decision you did out of necessity. But at the end, you think, well, maybe if I didn't, and he was so, I think, fighting for Tatum, she wasn't supposed to live. And I fought every day to keep her here. And I think when he really got sick and he started, becoming more simple minded, I think he really did think I could save him. And when
Mm,
someone believes in you that much, you start believing it yourself.
right. But I think it also, I wonder what you think about this. It really, I think it's that part where inside us to sort of feel some sense of order, we need to believe that we're in control or can influence more than we can.
Oh,
And
100%. Yeah, if you
yeah,
feel like you're out of control, then there's no hope.
right, right. And I think sometimes that can sort of like lead us into this space where we're, you know, you can always second guess anything. Anything's up for second guessing. You could have gone to MD Anderson and it could have been much worse, right? The
Right.
outcome could have been completely different. And I think, the reality is that we do the best we can, or we should do the best we can with what we have at any given point in life. And that's what we can do. The if I had gone to the doctor a little earlier, or if I had, encouraged them to do X, Y, or Z. But I find this relatable when my mom died. I mean, afterwards, it wasn't immediate, but long after, in my family, I have such a polite family, smart family, very polite family. I'm the least of the polite, I guess. So, my designated role when somebody gets sick is to be the calm one who gently quizzes the doctor until the doctor doesn't answer, and, just really pin them down on what's going on, or um, what's happening. It's just kind of the role that I've taken in my family because of all the polite people. If they're not getting the answers to their questions, they're polite. I'm less so. And, I remember a couple months after my mom died, just thinking to myself, well, what if I had asked about this? What if I had done that? Because there had been times over the years where my questions had actually led to resolutions of things. And I had to just grab myself and remind myself, man, what if you had done it? You know nothing about what would have happened. you know, your mom had a peaceful death, Jason. Be grateful for that and move along.
Right. But I think you're describing me in that scenario. Like I'm the person. I'm the one who's circling the wagons, figuring it out, making a plan, getting the research, not stopping at no. And I think when you have that type of personality, I think it's almost easier to beat yourself up after the fact because you do take control right away. Where everyone else is stepping back, not only are they looking to you, but you're looking to yourself, and your expectations are they're a step higher because you're taking so much responsibility for being well versed and taking initiative and being the person out in front that I think you beat yourself. I find that I think I beat myself up more than anyone else would because I was the one that was the decision maker. And as
Right.
much as, I didn't want to be, I had to decide to take my dad off of life support. I'm always in the decision making role, which is a heavy role. I mean, I accept it and I think I'm a good person for it. And it's taken me years to say, okay, I don't want to do it, but I get it. But it is a heavy responsibility. And I think after the fact, I don't think people understand because you make it look so easy to make those decisions. They think that they don't affect you the same way.
A key point. So my mom was sick for a while and, fragile, cognitively there, but fragile. And I remember about 10 years before my mom died, my partner, she said to me, she's going to die, right? And she looked me dead in the eyes. And you could tell she was really trying to get my attention because I was living in some other universe. And I remember a couple months after that thinking to myself, and this thought just came out of nowhere. And it was, no matter how smart you are, no matter how clever you are, no matter how loving you are, you can't save people from things
Yeah.
like death. Yeah.
Really from anything.
Yeah. Any kind of suffering.
Really anything. And if somebody doesn't want to better them, I mean, that's like a lifetime of, gosh, true of anything.
Mhm.
You can't save people from themselves even.
Yeah. As much as you want to, as much as you may want to. And sort of that brings me to another part of your story that sort of sticks out to me. And I think this is one of those confounding things I think about trauma. You write about how you eventually ended up in another relationship and it was an abusive relationship. And one of the things I think about often is the way that sort of trauma compounds. Like, you know, I remember when I was earlier in my career, when I was working as a mental health coach, I was working with a psychiatrist, and there was this woman we were both working with, and she was doing all these reckless behaviors, and she didn't know why she was doing them. And she worked as an EMT. And he turned to me and her one day when we were all meeting and said, "Have you ever heard of um, traumatic repetition?" And I was like, "No, I haven't heard of it." And he was saying one of the things that happens to people who experience a lot of trauma, compartmentalize that trauma, is they begin to do things that sort of repeat that trauma in their lives in ways where they have control over it, right? Or they feel they have a little bit more control of it. And that led to us having this longer, deeper conversation about the fact that in reality, that one of the things that opens people up to trauma and having repeated trauma is the first trauma, because the traumas begin to compound and compound on each other and leave us very vulnerable. And so it becomes this sort of accumulated set of trauma that I think sometimes can open us up to dangerous things and dangerous people. And I was curious when I was thinking of that. I really thought about one, trauma has this way of like creating this enormous amount of resilience and strength, but it also creates this enormous amount of vulnerability at the same time. Um, and I was wondering if that sort of played a role in the future, or, that you were vulnerable in some ways.
I think you almost necessarily have to be. I did come across, I as I'm sure we'll end up speaking of, I do come across a lot of women, who are in domestic violence situations. And, it amazes me that people see it as these women continue to choose the wrong men. Okay, and I'm only phrasing that because we're speaking of women, men in the same respect. They
Hmm.
see it as she keeps choosing the wrong guy. But I think that if you really look at it in the way that I see it, um, it is the guy choosing her.
No,
Because
I think you're making an excellent point.
yeah, and it's like it's not the same guy choosing her. It's a guy who is looking for the wounded parts of her and can see it, that
Yeah.
are choosing her because you know, when you become that caregiver, you can't, it's hard to step out of that caregiving role. I mean, even to this day, people always they don't laugh, but like if somebody's struggling to the door, I am up, I am like at the door, I'm opening the door for someone. And that caregiving sense doesn't leave you when that person that you are caregiving leaves.
No,
And all of that energy you kind of disperse onto other people.
and it's one
And
of the things I'm sure, and like if you go into sort of like the animal kingdom and think about it and think of predatory behavior, right? Like an animal hunting someone or even humans doing it. People pick the prey that's going to be most vulnerable. And I think you're hitting on like a brilliant point here, that a lot of people who are naturally good at being caregivers and live in that role for a long period of time, whether it's taking care of their spouse or someone else, or it's just their nature, they tend to be supportive. They tend to be really loyal to people, great qualities. They tend to be very eager to please and often very deferential and willing to conform to sort of what other people other people want. And I think if you were to write a playbook for sort of like the perfect supportive person for you, that would be a great description of them. But if you were to also write the playbook for the perfect prey for a bad person, for a predator, that is also the same description. The difference being the person not looking for a spouse or a partner as prey is giving that person the same thing back, right? You hear the conversations all the time, which goes like, you're always taking care of people. Let me take care of you, right? They're looking to give it back. But the predator isn't. And I actually think you're hitting on a huge point about domestic violence. Just like we spend a lot of time talking about women ending up in bad relationships, when you go and you look in the legal system, eventually a domestic abuser has murdered someone. And I just had someone on where her daughter was murdered by her boyfriend. And there was a trail of people in the towns around them, a trail of women over 20 years who had been abused by him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes exactly to your point.
Yeah. And the whole mindset of emotional abuse, like, oh, he didn't touch me. I tell people it will always end up with someone getting hurt physically, always, because the only way that they control you is through emotional abuse. And when the emotional stops working, because it does, again, I think the reason why caregivers get into those situations is because, I was coming off of something so horrific, as not being able. Colin was so sick that he couldn't open his eyes up. He would sit in bed with his sunglasses on because it had traveled to his brain and cry all day and all night. So as a caregiver, that was my existence. So someone else coming in and being kind of nasty to me a little bit, I had seen the worst. So, okay, then he had to be, and so I would accept that. Well, that wasn't good enough to keep me in line. So he had to get a little nastier. Okay. Because he could never equal the suffering that I saw with Colin or the horrible things that I had to endure with Colin. So whatever he was doing, first of all, was in stages. And secondly, couldn't ever be in my head as terrible as being, caregiving Colin was. Unfortunately, it does get that terrible, but it's in stages and you don't see it coming and you just keep thinking, oh, it's not that bad until, emotional abuse always turns physical. Always. And that's why I'm so happy that they're finally talking about, making a registry of these people because they don't stop. They don't.
I think Tennessee maybe recently passed a law and a couple other states have
control.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for coercive control. The and the reality I think that people don't realize when they're sitting and looking at people who are part of who are being abused in a relationship, in an intimate partnership, is it takes on average 7 times for a person. They try 7 times before they leave.
Before it sticks you.
Yeah. And it's really easy to look at that and be like, wow, that person just is not that bright. But the reality is, remind yourself, predators do what they do because it works. Like they're not doing it because it doesn't work. They're tapping into something real in human nature. Particularly the emotionally abusive stuff, the showering people with affection and then withholding it, making even the bad things that they do to other people, all of a sudden the other person's fault. You can, if you want a master class in this, they just released those 3 million Jeffrey Epstein files.
I know.
You go read through his emails, man. That guy had a gift, whether you were the CEO of a large company or you were a 19-year-old girl, he had a gift of turning around whatever your complaint was into your fault and you apologizing. And it's really interesting to watch it in the context of him doing it with these young girls, but also doing it with billionaires. and them falling into the same trap. Predators do it because it works.
And they're I don't think, I hate to say that, I always say it's so masterful the way that I hate to, because
It
masterful
is.
sounds like it's a positive trait, but the level, I mean, uh, my ex-husband's brain was working 24 hours a day. When I really sit back and I think about how far back it went and the levels and the depths of depravity that he was capable of, like, it is a full-time job. It is, I hate to commend the fact that they are true experts in their field, like something I have never seen before. And I would not have believed it if I did not live it. And I think that's the problem, is from the outside, it seems so obvious, but you don't know what these people are doing behind the scenes. And
Yeah.
it really is insidious, but fascinating. I think that is why we're also fascinated with true crime series. I mean,
Yes, so true.
but I will say, I stopped watching them because it's always the husband.
I said
It's
I
no
wanted to get a
surprise that-
pin that actually, like a pin you could put on your shirt that says, "Of course the husband did
Always the
it." I mean, it always is. It is.
It's
But
always the husband. Yeah.
and it's interesting, those same qualities that we're talking about, like that ability to persuade, the manipulation, the willingness to take risk, all that stuff, right? And then just being so socially skilled and talented. We do see it in other places, but I think the difference between those and the abusive people is that the other people know when to turn it off. You want a field where, like, just taking the issue of manipulation, it's very clear. Manipulation simply means to move someone or something from one place to another. It has a very pejorative connotation, but what do you think your therapist is doing? That's the whole goal, right? Like, you walk in your therapist's office in the first month, they've got your number. They don't say anything about it for the next year. Slowly help you make your way. So,
Well, I mean, think about Amazon. Yeah, I mean, that's
yes, right. Your therapist is not trying to, like, control your life, right?
right.
And so, I think people know when to sort of turn those skills off, and some people just can't. They're okay with living in this world that is entirely fake and entirely
Well, I
about
think
their
too,
control.
though, the manipulation is to their benefit.
Correct.
I mean, I think that is truly, nobody exists in a narcissistic person's world besides them. Everyone
Everything else is just an
everything.
object.
And a tool to get
Yeah.
what they want.
Yep.
And it is, I always say, if they would use those powers for good, not evil, this world would be such a great place. Because
I agree.
honest to God, like, there was not a thing my ex-husband could not do. Fix cars, it truly one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. And I still admire that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wish he would have used all of those powers and skill. He could have charmed the world to everyone's benefit rather than, they suck everything out of the people around them. And then they move forward on to the next victim.
How, for you, did you realize something was wrong, and how did you get out of that? Because I imagine you're also still taking care of your daughter, still raising your kids, having more kids.
Yeah. Well, babies always make it better. I want to say right out the gate, because people always ask me, there was something not right about him. It wasn't, he just was not, nothing you would say would ring true. I was always in a constant state of confusion. But again, coming off of the relationship with Colin, and the guilt that I felt when he was really mean to me, or when he would say things like, nobody likes you, I would think, well, yeah, he's probably right, because I did not like myself. And so whatever he was doing almost felt cathartic in that moment. I felt like I deserved it. I almost felt like it was penance or, redemption.
You were carrying all that guilt too.
I was. So it was, it felt good for some reason until it didn't. And I think it wasn't until I really saw the effects on my children. Um, he was very, very brutal on my kids. And I might have stayed forever because I really don't think that I cared enough about myself. And I wasn't ready to sit with all of the feelings that I had from my history. I just kept pushing it along, like I said. That ability to deny and roll with really just became a way of life. And it wasn't working for me anymore. But I didn't see it. I couldn't see it. I didn't want to see it. It had worked for so long that I was just going to keep on keeping on. And I was able to tell a tale to myself that, I was, the things that you tell yourself. The kid, he never came home at night because he was an alcoholic. So the kids don't ever hear us fighting. We text fight. And I was able to excuse it until my son came to me. And he was 16 at the time. And if anyone got the brunt of it, it was him. And he said to me, Mom, he's threatened to kill you. He's threatened to kill me in front of you. And I just really don't understand why you keep going back. I've lost my childhood. I don't come out of my room. I'm afraid.
Mhm.
I sleep with something under my bed to protect myself. And I've been doing it since I was 6.
Oh, wow.
And although I knew it, in that moment, I was forced to really take accountability. And I knew it. If I didn't love myself enough, and I thought I deserved that treatment, certainly my children didn't. And
Mm,
that was the beginning of the end.
mm. Was it easy to walk away?
No,
No.
no, it's still not. You know, when you are told over and over and over again that you are the problem, and your whole reality shifts. I can't describe it. When someone keeps telling you that the sky is purple, even though you know it's blue, if they say it enough times, you're like, yeah, I guess it is kind of purple. And everything that you knew about yourself, that you knew to be true, it goes out the window. And all of a sudden you're told that that you can't trust yourself anymore. I will say even to this day, and we're talking about, this is what I do for a living. I help women in these situations. I talk about it and try and wake other people up to it. There are still those rare moments where I will hear something, and in the back of my head, I will think, was I the narcissist? And
Mm.
it is, I have conversations with people sometimes, and I will thank them at the end of the conversation and say, thank you for reminding me how bad it was and how unhealthy it was, because you bounce right back to that. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. And I did just have a conversation with someone who was telling me about their ex-husband and their experience. And I started hearing my own story again. And I said to her at the end, thank you. Thank you very much for reminding me, because I'm very, I will believe you, but sometimes I don't trust and believe myself.
Mm. Yeah. And I mean, it's that concept. I love the example you gave about the sky being purple, because I am looking across from me. There is actually a picture of Lake Superior and a lighthouse on it where the sky is purple. And there's another picture over the Chesapeake Bay where the sky is clearly blue. And there are these moments, and I think it's a great example. There are these rare moments where the sky is purple. And I think that's the thing about manipulative people. They take this little piece of truth, right?
Mhm.
And they turn it into everything. And like you said, when you come back and you're like, no, the sky is blue, they're like, it's sort of like bluish purple. And you're like, okay, maybe, maybe it's bluish
You're just
purple.
catching a very rare moment, Julie. Give it
Right,
time. Give
yeah,
it time.
yeah, give it some time. Sort of. But then you begin to question everything about yourself in reality. And I can't tell you how many people that I know who have been convinced that they were a narcissist or they had borderline or whatever it was. And then inevitably there's someone in their family, whether it's their mom, their husband, their whoever, who fits the bill to a T. And I think that's one of the things, going back to that Epstein point, is that people who are very manipulative are very good at what I call flipping the switch, where they turn it right back on you and project onto you the actual problem that they have. I don't believe this applies all the time. I don't think this is always the case, but I think that phrase that people use, that, every accusation is a confession, in those kinds of relationships, it's very often true.
It is. And I will tell you that, I always, I teetered because you're always, if you are a thoughtful person, you do wonder, why can't I get along with this person? Maybe I am the problem. And you're the first, and they're right there saying, you're the problem, you're the problem. So yeah, they flip the switch to the point where you just don't even know what's up anymore.
Yep. And some of it, I think, for a lot of people, going back to your previous point about, people looking at women who are in those situations and wondering why they don't leave, that you're saying that people are saying that from a perspective where they don't have someone who's flipping them and their world upside down. And it's really easy to look on the outside, but I suspect if any of us look deep enough, whether maybe it was a friend and it wasn't a spouse, or it was a parent, or it was someone in our lives who, had that ability to do that, inevitably we run across someone. And then all of a sudden, imagine they're your partner, because I think we all have people in our lives where it might be your best friend or whoever, or an associate who can flip the world upside down. And imagine being with that every day in every way. Like, you lose yourself and who you really are, your identity, your values. You lose any read on your own self-awareness because it's constantly being challenged. It's hard enough on your own to develop meaningful self-awareness.
And I think that, people think that once you leave, it's over. It just begins. If people stay in these situations for things that you don't see, people even stay in these situations for things that they don't see. It took me, many years, because I would question myself, like, why did you stay in that? Why did you? And what people don't see is I had 2 little girls, right? And these are situations that are real. They were babies. And I knew that when I called it quits, because in the back of your head that it's going to get ugly, I knew that he would use those 2 little girls against me because they were the only thing that I care about. And I would have had to hand those girls over to him to take in a car. And he was always driving drunk. He used to drink while driving, literally. And they would not have been able to defend themselves. They would not have been able to tell me about it. I would have no control over that situation. So it's very easy to say you're being stupid or why are you? But what you don't see is there are many, many reasons. And they're usually not something that I think that people think you're fabricating in your head, like all of these reasons why. They are true and serious and real reasons. When my husband came for me, when you talk about flipping the switch, and he went to the court, he told them I was an alcoholic, I was a drug addict, everything that he was telling the court I was, down to, and this is not funny, but this is where I drew the line. He had made a report that I abused dogs. And I was like, that is where I draw the line.
You have now gone too far. Call me a drug addict. Call me an alcoholic.
You can say animal abuser. Animal, yeah. I mean, that was like the last straw. But, that is what you deal with. And that. You are not blind to how truly maniacal they can be. You don't want to admit it to yourself, but you see they act like that to other people around you. You have seen them destroy people in front of you.
I'll tell you a story.
And people don't know that.
So there's a couple I know. And well, they're no longer a couple. And they had been going through difficulties for years and years and years. He was abusive, emotionally abusive, like pretty bad and pretty erratic and all sorts of other things like that. And I remember her finally saying to him, and I happen to be present for this moment, that I'm done, I'm walking away. And they started talking about the kids. And she makes the point to him, you're an alcoholic, you're a sex addict, you're, all these different things, right? You're emotionally abusive. And he said, this was so good. He said, the only thing that matters is which one of us can charm and persuade the judge. And I thought that was like a moment where the mask came off for a second. And I think people have lots of fears around that it doesn't really matter what happened to me. This person is charming. There are all those qualities that make them so good at being an abuser. You worry they're going to use those against you afterwards.
Oh,
and I think that's a part of the cycle. Yes, right.
You know they will. And like I said, you are not the only,
You've seen them do it to other people.
Other people. I mean, he was so good at taking people out. And by the time you admit it to yourself, he had 5 years worth. He would push my buttons so that he could get me to react, and then he would videotape me. He would save text messages from 5 years ago. Like, he was building a case against me, and all I wanted to do was make things work. So when I recognized that I had done some pretty crazy stuff to keep him around, that's when I knew, holy cow, I'm in a lot of trouble here. Because not only is he recorded all this, I've acted pretty darn crazy. And he has taped it. He's told everyone, I'm not going to win this. I'm going to either walk away. I'm going to lose family. I'm going to lose friends. I'm going to lose everything. And he's done all, and you haven't defended yourself or protected yourself because that's not your nature.
Right. And you haven't documented it by telling people because you don't want to make the person look bad. How did you finally get away?
So we had separated several times. And, like you said about the seven times, the average person takes 7 times. I think we were on 20 because I would kick him out and then I would freak out and then I would ask him back. And finally, he, that was the cycle. I would kick him out and then I would beg him back. Well, in the last time, I didn't beg him back. I still think he's probably still scratching his head, not believing that I wasn't going to apologize and say I'm sorry and beg back. But like I said, when my son said that to me, that was it. And I thought, I really don't care what I'm going to lose. I knew I'd lost friends. I knew that family members, people will take their sides and they'll take their pick. And he was going to expose me and my stupid yelling at him or stupid text messages. And in that moment, I thought, I've said it all. I put it out there. When you finally tell the truth and when you finally accept that it's going to get ugly and you say, I don't care. Get as ugly as you want. If I lose friends, they weren't there to begin with. And it doesn't come overnight. You have to settle into it. But when you recognize that you cannot do this for one more day and you're going to have to accept the consequences of what comes your way, you can't ever turn back. And I remember friends saying to me, when you're done, you will know. And I thought, no, I will never be done because I kept going back to that same well. But you hit a point where there's no turning. The veil has come off. And it's almost like, you watch the 60s shows where people are hit, in something and all of a sudden, like they wake up. Like that's what happens is you wake up out of a trance and you're like, you see everything and it comes at you instantly. And all of a sudden you think, what was I doing? And it's over. they can never do that to you again because the veil has come off. Maybe to some degree, like if he came back and he wanted to see the girls and it was safe, again, that's why I always love when people tell me their story because I'm like, no, Julie, no, do not let that happen.
Don't do that.
Don't go back there. No.
I think it's the best thing about helping people when you're sitting there and you're giving them some advice and you're like, oh yeah, I should totally do that too in your own head.
Right?
No, I should totally not do that. Whichever one it is. So I'm curious for you. I know you've spent a lot of time, I think, focusing on advocacy and also helping people and using your experiences. It kind of ties to an issue that I think we probably don't deal with. I remember earlier in the conversation, you were talking about growing up as a part of Gen X, so that, 80s, 90s world. If you know Def Leppard or Cyndi Lauper times, as I would say, during that time, you were very right. And I felt that too. It was a period of women's empowerment. You had a generation of women who had fought really hard. And there was a belief at the time, sort of like as women, you could have it all. You could have your career, you could have, you can have a family, you could have both, you could do kind of whatever you want. And there was this sort of, I think, an expectation that you had to be strong and you had to push through, which I think is something that women have carried for a long, 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 long time. I think of the matriarchs of my family and the people who have held for generations and generations, held our families together. But that strength is often in silence. And I remember hearing about my grandmother's life, my mom's mom, after she died, and hearing about a lot of suffering she went through, depression, not always the best stuff my grandfather ever did. He certainly wasn't abusive, but I wouldn't want to marry him. But I had no inkling in her entire life that I would have thought she had lived a completely charmed life. And I sort of fear that there are so many women out there who are silent and who are suffering, who are trying to take care of themselves and take care of their lives. And I think it's really important to have a voice, putting voice to the things that you're saying. And so I'm sort of curious about sort of that part of your journey, the journey into sort of being an advocate and telling your story, and sort of what your, I think, hopes are and what your dreams are for other women who have gone through some of these struggles.
I think it is definitely, women are raised so much differently than men. And having, 4 girls and 2 boys, I can honestly say my girls get away with nothing. If they go fold your clothes, do your laundry, put your stuff away. My boys, it's more of it's okay. I'll do it for you. I don't know why. I think there's some sense that's been passed down and continues to be passed down from generation to generation where women know nobody's going to do it for them. And we train our daughters, get it done, don't complain about it, nobody's going to come save you. And I think that's a great message. I think had I not had, and that's my mother to a T, overly so. Had I not had my mother, I might not have made it through everything that I've been through and been able to bounce and roll and be independent. But in the same breath, I also can't accept help. I would never ask someone. I mean, literally, I could have a limb drop off and I wouldn't even turn around and ask somebody if they could pick it up and help me put it back on. That is the level of, nope, you do it yourself. You are good. You can take care of it yourself. Don't lean on anyone. You don't need anyone. Everyone's looking to you. Suck it up. Be strong. It's your everything is my responsibility. And that's my perspective, but I would dare say that that's 80% of the women out there.
Oh, yeah, no.
Our responsibility.
Right.
And
there's
so
nobody behind you to clean it up. I remember having this conversation and where I had said, my partner at the time, admire her, unbelievably strong woman. And I'm like, I'm like driven and ambitious, but like, if you like skiing, sure, I'm good with skiing. If you want to go to a museum, I'm good with that. If you want to, so I'm very sort of like laissez-faire about what, if you want to go do something, if it makes you happy, it'll make me happy, right? And so one weekend we're talking and she's like, well, what do you want to do today? And I'm like, whatever you want to do, right? I think I'm being the good human being here, right? Because seriously, whatever will make her happy, I'll do. And she said to me, why do I have to make every decision? And it really dawned on me in that moment, not just about her, but so many women carry the weight of everything. And here I am thinking that I'm giving agency, right? Because we get to do what you want to do. And I realized what she really wanted to do was not make a decision.
That is my dream. It really is my dream for somebody. And to say this out loud goes completely counterintuitive to everything that we've been taught as women. I would love for a man to come over tonight, take over my house, make every financial decision, decide where the kids are going to go to school next year, just for a day, just to solve everything, make every decision I need. And I want to sit back and watch, because then when it all messes up, it's not my problem, because everything's always my problem. Like every decision I make is going to be a kickback if it goes wrong. There's something to be said about like women, we make decisions every day and we don't want to give up power because we've been taught not to give up power. But the problem is we've lost all of our power because we don't ever give anything up. So we've lost the power to just be at peace, to compromise a little bit, to like let someone else take the wheel.
To have partnerships with people.
Yeah. And it just feels unnatural, and it shouldn't. But I think once we were told we were responsible for half the finances or more, then, we take on, I would say, 90% of child rearing and household, and then you add another 50%. And the numbers don't math is not mathing anymore.
Right? It's not working well anymore.
It's really just not working. And so when you ask me what my hope is that women, we can start teaching the next generation that it's okay to be vulnerable, that we do want you to be independent. But for God's sakes, you don't have to hold the world up. It's not your responsibility to make everyone and everything okay. Yes, we're caregivers. Yes, we're child reared. We're all of those things. But that doesn't mean that you're responsible for everything, because that's a heavy burden. And it's something you can't describe as a mom, as a spouse, as everything, as a daughter, as a cousin. It's a lot. And there's never a break in any of it. There's never a day where, you know what, today it's not my responsibility.
Amen to that. Because first job as a human is to live well. To take care of yourself and your needs and find quality of life and fulfillment. And while all those other things are important and meaningful, they shouldn't come at the sacrifice of being able to give to yourself what you give to other people.
Yeah, when you don't make yourself a priority, and that's come full circle how you said you can't save anybody. That's a very, very hard pill to swallow. And the more you try, because a lot of the joy that I have in life, and people ask me what makes you happy, it makes me happy to make other people happy. But that is an endless cycle, because you're never going to make anybody happy but yourself. But you're so busy trying to make everyone else happy that you're making yourself miserable, and you don't even know it because you're waiting for a smile from someone else.
A lot of the pain that comes from sort of swallowing that pill that you're talking about is it sort of shakes our understanding of ourselves. But sometimes I think we do have to taste bitter things to really be able to heal. And I think one of them is that we can't be everything to everyone, that we can't save people, that we can't help people at the expense of losing ourselves. I would hate to think that my life is bettered because someone went through unnecessary suffering. Even if it wasn't abusive, even if it was just my mom or whoever. So anyway, I think that is a beautiful place to start. We haven't even mentioned it, but your book, Notes from the Blackberry, which was very a nostalgic title for me, I think, is out there. And, I look forward to sort of staying in touch and continuing to follow the good work you're doing. And, one of the things that I really appreciate about your sort of honesty and vulnerability here is that you're acknowledging the important thing that it's a journey. It's not a finished solid state that anyone gets to. Just like we were talking about grief before, like any recovery, healing, or taking care of yourself it's an active verb. It's not a state. I like that piece.
Yeah, it's definitely ongoing.
Yeah. Yeah, relatable.
I would say, I think that, we all have this. I can't tell you how many times something's happened and you just want to get back. You just want to get back to normal, back to where you were. But just like you can't go home again after you leave for college, right? Like you can never get back to where you were. And that's okay because you're going to get back to better than you were.
Right.
But you're always trying to get back to where you were supposed to be. And if you were meant to be there, you'd still be there.
Where you're supposed to be is where you're at.
Yes. Well, not entirely true. I'm probably missing an appointment right now.
Well, then maybe this is where you're supposed to be.
Exactly.
Right? Thanks for joining Julie and I for this conversation. If you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, and to support the podcast, you can also join us at our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you guys all again soon.